Tonight, Hong Kong clampdown.
We shall not surrender.
Adrian is on the scene as prominent activists are arrested. The latest on the pro-democracy movement at a crossroads.
Oh yeah, it is difficult to replace a big marketplace like China.
Canadian farmers reap the highs and lows of a global trade war. We've got the tale of two crops.
I filled up yesterday for 122.9, and today it's 152.9.
And all set for the summer's last long weekend. Just one thing about those gas prices. This is The National. Prominent pro-democracy players in Hong Kong rounded up, a protest march banned, and for protesters, fear. All signs now that officials in Hong Kong are moving to shut demonstrations down. Over a few hours, police arrested high-profile activists, the head of a banned pro-independence party, and 3 Hong Kong lawmakers. They've also successfully blocked permission for a Saturday demonstration. All summer, hundreds of thousands have taken to the streets undeterred by clashes and crackdowns. But this marks a new level of pressure, with Beijing also signaling what it's prepared to do, releasing this video of paramilitary police running anti-riot drills against umbrella-wielding opponents, just a few kilometers away on the mainland. It's made for an unpredictable scene on Hong Kong streets, where it's now already well into Saturday, and that's where tonight's special coverage begins, and where Adrian joins us now.
Ian, so I'm right here where the main peaceful protest was supposed to begin later today before it was banned. Whether it goes ahead, whether protesters move, depends really on whether those protesters choose caution or confrontation, and frankly, there are signs of both.
This isn't going over well. Inside that police van, some of the young Hong Kong pro-democracy activists who've been rounded up and arrested, nearly half a dozen grabbed in a few hours. Most notably, Joshua Wong, 22, prominent during the umbrella movement protests in 2014, and an inspiration in this round. He was released on bail and he's spitting mad.
But we still keep on our fight. We shall not surrender.
That's the promise, but it's getting more complicated for Hong Kongers to demand full democracy and an inquiry into police brutality. Organizers of the massive peaceful protests this summer had planned another for Saturday. It was banned. They tried to appeal and lost, so they had to cancel the official march.
Do you think, though, that this will make it even more tense, that some people will be angrier and be tempted to go out?
I really do not want to see clashes happen. I also fear that it is human nature that when peaceful people come out again and again and our peaceful demands, legitimate demands, are not heard, it's human nature that Hong Kong people or any other people would become more radical. And
certainly the anxiety is rising. That's activist Jimmy Sham. This week, he and a colleague were attacked in a restaurant, his friend beaten trying to protect Jimmy. And Jimmy's phone is full of threats. They're blunt. It would be good for Hong Kong if you die, one message says. Pro-Beijing voices angry with all these activists are getting bolder. As we start to talk with Jimmy, a man yells at him in the background.
Was that man yelling at you?
It was a homophobic slur, a common insult now.
Are you afraid?
Yes, I'm afraid, but I will stand firm with Hong Kong.
But you won't go out tomorrow?
I can't because it's illegal. Yeah. I need to protect myself and fight with Hong Kong.
Did they win?
Huh?
Did they win? Did the government win?
No.我想講嘅係
No country can always win over its people, he says. The people eventually win. The activists need that sort of optimism because the intimidation tactics being used against them are getting more serious. In the face of that, how to stay firm. Any way they can. Video like this is shared widely on social media because at 10 p.m. almost every night, the bellows from the buildings. Hong Kongers yelling, "Add oil." In other words, fuel this fight. They may want to, The world waits to see if they will.
So, Adrian, after bans and with arrests, is there any sense of how the day is going to unfold?
So hard to know. I mean, one thing I can tell you for sure is those arrests really infuriated people, energized them in an odd way. The protest that was supposed to start in a few hours just in the park beside me here, we'll see if they show up. We've been in contact with some of the more hardcore protesters who say, make no mistake, they will take to the streets today. Some of the medics tell us they too are prepared to be there in the event of clashes. There's an authorized religious gathering later today, so don't be surprised if some of the protesters are welcomed into that fray. Really, this is a matter right now of knowing that police are wise to all of their plans, so this is a dangerous cat and mouse situation.
And what about the options? What options do the authorities have?
You know, I think what we have to keep in mind is that there is a date here, October the 1st. China has its eye on that date. That's the 70th anniversary of the People's Republic of China. They want this over by then. So the urgency is ramping up. The protesters still have a phenomenal amount of public support. They are young, they are tech and media savvy. They have the advantage of being very fluid and leaderless, hard to pin down. Hong Kong has a lot of tools it can go to here. Certainly the prospect of emergency laws, banning some parts of social media, stopping people from wearing masks, even gas masks in the street. Mass arrests are possible. They have a lot of weaponry. Those water cannons are said to be twirling around the city today. Certainly there are anti-riot vehicles that are electrified, have sonic weapons, and there's the nuclear option, Ian, which is military intervention. The threat of that is real, even though no one believes that it will come to that.
All right. Adrian, thank you. And Adrian, we'll have more from Hong Kong over the coming days. And our coverage continues in about 15 minutes when we dig down to the roots of the crisis and talk to Hong Kong experts about where it might be headed next. Hurricane Dorian, seen here from the International Space Station, is edging closer to the Bahamas. Late tonight, it was upgraded to an extremely dangerous Category 4 storm with winds of 215 kilometers an hour. It's forecast to hit Florida late Monday. By that time, Donald Trump warns it could build into an absolute monster. But as Carolyn Dunn tells us, residents aren't waiting to stock up and hunker down.
Queues for supplies are getting longer by the hour. This is Hurricane Prep 101 in Florida.
I went through Andrew and I lost my house, so that made me ready. So I don't take no chances.
Get as much food as you can get. At least keep you hydrated for a couple of days. We don't know how long we're gonna have lights off.
Got a bunch of water just now, trying to get gas while we still have some. Eat all the food in the freezer and the refrigerator. Try to keep nothing. Pack up the bird, the 3 dogs.
Some stores have run out of water. Non-perishables are flying off the shelves. 2 days before the hurricane is set to make landfall, fuel is such a hot commodity, some gas stations have already sold out. Not a drop of fuel left. Dorian is building speed and could pack winds up to 250 kilometers an hour by the time it makes landfall on Monday or Tuesday. Its impacts expected not just in coastal communities, but across the state.
Rain, flooding, debris. It's going to be a large impact storm.
This is potentially a multi-day event where it will churn slowly across the state.
So the Florida National Guard has up to 12,000 airmen ready to respond if the worst comes to pass.
We are mobilizing as we speak. We expect about 2,000 soldiers and airmen from the Florida National Guard mobilized by the end of the day today. By the end of the day tomorrow, it'll probably be doubled by about 4,000.
President Donald Trump canceled the planned trip to Poland.
It's one of the biggest hurricanes we've seen in a long time, so it could be very devastating.
Even NASA moved its mobile shuttle launcher indoors to get out of Dorian's path. It's still too early to know exactly where Dorian will hit and where it will hit the hardest. So Floridians do what they can to shield their homes and families.
It's just stressful. I've been through this a couple times in the last 15 years, and this is the worst.
Reinforcements against a coming storm do little to ease that anxiety. Carolyn Dunn, CBC News, Washington.
And CBC meteorologist Brett Soderholm has been tracking this storm for us. And Brett, this seems like an especially tough one to forecast.
It really has been difficult for these forecasters over the past few days, and it really is because in order to create an accurate forecast, we need to have really reliable, real-time observations of variables such as temperature, air pressure, wind speed, and direction. Now, normally those come from weather stations that would be stationed all over the continent, but when you're over open water, it's a very different story. Dorian that you can see here is well north of any large bodies of land. We're talking anywhere north of the Dominican Republic or Puerto Rico, or even the islands of Turks and Caicos. This means it's quite difficult to get an accurate reading. So as a way to mitigate that, scientists have actually boarded an aircraft and are flying into the very center of the storm itself. These are called hurricane hunters, and their primary goal is to collect observations that are going to be useful in predicting where the storm is going to be going as it progresses over the next 2 to 3 days.
That is fascinating. I'd love to be on one of those flights. A lot of Canadians with connections to Florida, and they're wondering when will they get a clearer sense of when the storm and where the storm is going to make landfall in that state.
Yeah, truly, it will be within the window of about 24 to 48 hours. That's when we have the best idea. Of course, everyone is already on high alert with this. When it comes to Dorian specifically, as it passes over the islands of the northwestern Bahamas, it will pass over weather stations there, and that will give a much clearer picture by the time that Monday rolls around to see exactly where Dorian is expected to make landfall.
All right. Thanks, Brett.
You're welcome.
Post-tropical storm Erin swept over the Maritimes last night. A couple of communities in Nova Scotia got more than 150 millimeters of rain, and that caused flash flooding.
It rained hard. I mean, yeah, I was in bed, but I could hear it pounding on the roof of the house, so.
And this is what the flooding looked like. Culverts couldn't keep up, ditches overflowed, roads turning into rivers, and creating a lot of damage. Some temporary fixes will be made over the next few days, but it could take weeks for all the work to get done. As we head into this long Labor Day weekend, a look at the average price of gas tonight in provinces and territories across Canada. The low mark, Alberta, just under $1 a litre. The high right next door in British Columbia, and that number even higher here in Metro Vancouver, where the price at the pumps spiked overnight. Big swings in gas prices are so typical here. The Premier ordered an inquiry to look at why, and today we got the results. But as Tanya Fletcher tells us, that doesn't necessarily mean we got an answer.
I filled up yesterday for $122.9, and today it's $152.9, 30 cents.
It's that kind of frustration that triggered the investigation in the first place. When prices spiked to $1.70 in the spring, the province was pressured to do something about it. So BC's Premier ordered an inquiry. Now its conclusion raises more questions.
Prices in the Metro Vancouver area are higher by an unexplained 13 cents a litre.
Wholesale prices in southern BC are set based on those in the U.S. Pacific Northwest. The inquiry found a 20-cent per litre difference in cost between Vancouver and Seattle. 7 cents of that comes from transportation costs and BC's higher fuel standards, but the remaining 13 cents could not be explained, and it's costing BC drivers an extra $500 million a year.
And the higher price differentials cannot be explained by economic theory or justified by known factors in the market.
The report did not find evidence of collusion among oil and gas companies, but it did highlight the role of some major players.
Refiner marketers, including Parkland, Suncor, Shell, and Husky, have greater direct control over pricing in BC's retail stations when compared to the Canadian average.
The findings are a measure of vindication for the BC government.
This report has brought a focus to the degree to which the wholesale market for gasoline in British Columbia is not a competitive market.
So what is the province going to do about it? The government says it'll consider a recommendation to regulate prices, but drivers are still skeptical.
I don't know how much they can actually manipulate that, but it'd be nice if it was a little bit more fair.
Tanya Fletcher, CBC News, Vancouver.
And starting today, drivers in Ontario should be seeing anti-carbon tax stickers on gas pumps, a law making them mandatory now in effect, brought in by the provincial government as it fights the federal carbon tax. The stickers show the carbon tax adding up to 11 cents per litre to the price of gas by 2022. They don't point out, though, that Ontarians will also get a rebate on their income tax. Doug Ford says this is about education. Critics say it's propaganda. If gas stations don't display the stickers, they could be fined up to $10,000 a day. But Inspectors will focus on education and compliance first. On Wednesday, the Ontario government announced it's taking its legal fight against the carbon tax to the Supreme Court of Canada. And Prince Edward Island announced today that it's dropping out of a different court challenge of the federal carbon tax. It was registered as an intervener in Saskatchewan's case, which is expected to be heard at the Supreme Court in December. The fashion brand Dior has come under fire over a new ad for a perfume. It features Native American imagery and what many are calling an insensitive brand name. Within minutes of its release, Dior faced intense backlash on social media. As Zuleka Nathu explains, many feel there's nothing sweet about this perfume ad.
It's an ad for cologne featuring Johnny Depp wandering through southern Utah. His path is marked with indigenous imagery and the name of the product.
The new sauvage, le parfum, Dior.
In French, it means wild or savage.
Even wild or savage is an old way to think about Indigenous people.
Leslie Hampton is an Indigenous fashion designer.
If we're representing Indigenous people as savage, then what are you telling your kids? What are you telling anyone about how you think of these people, even though you're inspired by Indigenous culture, but then you're slapping them in the face pretty much.
This particular short film is truly a love letter.
Dior says the ad was shot on location at a national park with Native American consultants. While some support the efforts, others on social media were quick to call out the ad, describing it as tone-deaf and racist.
It's the traditional women writers of Mexico.
It's not the first time Dior has been accused of being culturally insensitive. Last year, an ad meant to celebrate Mexican culture had no Mexicans in it. Instead, it featured actress Jennifer Lawrence. In fact, the luxury fashion industry at large has taken heat over a number of recent missteps. Prada's blackface caricatures, Gucci's blackface sweater, Dolce & Gabbana's ad showing an Asian woman trying to eat Italian food with chopsticks.
It's a tone-deaf or culturally insensitive industry, and they've been getting away with it for a long time. But it seems that some of the backlash is starting to sink in and make some waves.
Dior says its aim was to move away from stereotypes and cliches. It has since pulled the ad from its social media accounts. Zuleka Nathu, CBC News, Los Angeles.
We're watching several other developing stories on the National tonight, including one in Quebec. The federal Liberals have dropped a candidate accused of making anti-Semitic comments. But Brith says the comments from Hassan Gier appeared on social media. CBC has not independently confirmed what they were, but in a statement, the Liberals say, following a thorough internal review process that's been ongoing for a few weeks, the Liberal Party of Canada has made the decision to revoke the candidacy of Mr. Gier for the riding of St. Leonard Saint-Michel in this fall's election. In a statement of his own, Gier apologized for some of his past comments and said he has evolved. And some harrowing footage from Ottawa of an impatient driver nearly causing a collision. The trucker who took this video says there are a lot of potholes along the road, so he was taking it slow. The driver of the SUV trying to pass him on the shoulder, they nearly lost control and swerved into oncoming traffic. The video has been forwarded to police. And there are growing concerns over sinkholes in Nova Scotia after laser mapping revealed dozens of them along the Trans-Canada Highway near Oxford. This is the same area where a sinkhole the size of an Olympic swimming pool opened up last summer.
Could what happened at the Lions Parkland of a cover collapse sinkhole happen on the Trans-Canada Highway? That's the question.
A persistent pothole and a sinkhole pond has already opened up near the highway. The town wants the province to test the ground beneath it to quantify the risk. The province says crews are now out daily looking for sinkhole activity. It is harvest time in many parts of Canada, and while there are no certainties in the business of agriculture, this year is more tumultuous than most. Trade disputes with China have created volatility in the markets, and while farmers of some Canadian crops are struggling, others are finding opportunity. Tonight we look at two crops. Rafi Boudjikanian will check in with a wheat farmer in Alberta, but first, Cameron McIntosh is in the canola fields of Manitoba.
This is it.
Yeah, this is our canola crop.
Swathed and ready to harvest, Chuck Fossey is happy with his canola crop this year.
It looks like we'll get a decent yield.
He's just not sure who's going to buy it all. with the Chinese market closed.
It is difficult to replace a big marketplace like China.
Normally, about 40% of Canadian canola seed goes to China. This spring, China barred Canadian imports. Apparent retaliation for the arrest and detention of Chinese tech executive Meng Wanzhou. Just as farmers like Fosse were starting to seed. Too late to change their plans.
We'll just proceed as we normally do and hope for the best.
Over the summer, China hasn't shown much willingness to negotiate, let alone reopen its doors. That has the Canadian canola industry looking for new markets. Drought in Europe is creating demand for Canadian canola there. There's also an emerging market in biodiesel. Canola can be turned into a fuel. It's helping keep prices up, but doesn't replace the Chinese market.
It's also absolutely critical that the Government of Canada find a way to improve and maintain a solid political relationship with China.
The Foreign Affairs Minister concedes it's been challenging.
We do continue at officials level to have regular, even frequent contact with Chinese officials.
Well, I did my part, Mother Nature did their part.
Now you just need the politicians to pull through.
Yeah, well, it'd be nice. Politicians would get in there and work maybe a little harder.
In the meantime, harvest continues. That crop needs to go somewhere. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, near Starbuck, Manitoba.
I'm Rafi Vujikanian. I'm here in Bentley, Alberta, where wheat farmers are experiencing quite the opposite scenario. It's not quite harvest season for Jason Lenz yet, but it's close enough for him to check on his grain truck and start to check on his crops.
We still have some green stems here.
Along with wheat, Lenz grows canola and barley, a mix that's coming in handy this year. Wheat's a big moneymaker.
It's been a bit of a bonus for us, but China has almost tripled their imports of Canadian wheat over this past year.
There are few options for China when it comes to wheat. As its trade dispute goes on with the United States, its other big wheat seller, Australia, is off the market too due to crop failures.
So they have limited ability to satisfy the Chinese market. So we're benefiting from that in the short term.
But wheat has its own problems too. Italy introduced country of origin labeling 2 years ago, shutting Canadian durum wheat out.
We have far too many trade irritants in the world right now.
Instability that's just bad for business. Steve is not hopeful for help from Ottawa.
We're going into a period of the next 2 months where the federal parties will be in the election mode, and there probably will not be a lot of progress made on these files.
Back in Bentley,
some of those things are out of our control. And
Jason Lenz says he'll have to get used to unpredictable politics along with unpredictable weather.
You've got to take some of the good with the bad as well.
Rafi Bujikanian, CBC News, Bentley, Alberta.
When we come back, in depth on what's next for protesters in Hong Kong. Plus,
don't vape, don't use Juul.
What prompted that warning from the CEO of Juul, one of the most popular vape companies? We'll be right back.
we Hong Kong people won't give up and won't be scared.
When the government go hard, we go hard.
Even they arrest me or other activists or lawmakers, people will still come out to the street.
Those Hong Kong activists suggest arrests will galvanize protesters. Others say it has sent a chill through the movement. As the city braces for what comes next, we take an in-depth look. Over the course of 13 weeks, the protests have evolved. Their original goal has expanded. Violence has escalated. Both sides locked on a collision course. Here's how we got here. In September of 2014, tens of thousands of people in Hong Kong, led by then 18-year-old Joshua Wong, filled the streets, protesting proposed changes to Hong Kong's electoral system. After a 79-day standoff, the movement was shut down. 5 years later, another controversial move by Hong Kong's government. A proposed bill would allow for extraditions to mainland China. In what would be the first of many protests, an estimated 1 million people march against the bill. Days later, the situation intensifies when police use tear gas on protesters. More demonstrations. Nearly 2 million people in Hong Kong take to the streets demanding the bill be formally withdrawn. The ongoing campaign against the extradition bill is described by protesters as leaderless, often anonymous activists spreading information about demonstrations on social media apps like Telegram. The goal is to be like water, adaptable, mobile, and keeping authorities guessing. On the 22nd anniversary of Hong Kong's return to China, some protesters turned violent, trashing the building of the Legislative Council. A week later, the government pivots.
The bill is dead.
But protesters, unsatisfied with Lam's response, announced 5 demands, which include formally withdrawing the bill and calling for an independent inquiry into police actions. Violence erupts again, this time at Yuen Long train station, as men dressed in white assault protesters, among others. China ramps up its response, sending a military convoy to the Shenzhen border. Flights are suspended at Hong Kong's airport as thousands take part in sit-ins. 2 mainlanders are detained and beaten by protesters. The demonstrators reset with a peaceful march attended by an estimated 1.7 million people. But that peace doesn't last long. Police clash with protesters again last weekend, at times in the chaos, pulling out their guns. Well, joining us now to talk about this are Andrea Chun, a broadcaster and lawyer with ties to Hong Kong, and Wenran Zheng, a China expert from the University of British Columbia. Welcome to both of you. And Andrea, let me start with you. What do you think is the motivation behind these arrests?
It's very clear to me. These arrests have been made over the last day or so. I do not believe in coincidences, and therefore I think the government is trying to thwart the planned protests for tomorrow. But I think this is a wrong move, because even though these are prominent activists, including, I might add, legislators elected by the people, there are actually no leaders in this movement. So I think what they have done is actually antagonize people more, and they might provoke more protesters to come out on the streets tomorrow.
Wenran? That is always a fear, whether the arrest would actually trigger more anger, as Andrea mentioned, and actually have more people pumped into the street. But at the same time, I think the measure is designed to curb the kind of out of control demonstrations and mixed with violence. After the airport occupation and the violence, the following week, we in fact had a fairly peaceful but large-scale demonstration, and then the violence coming back again. I think the authorities are trying to not to let this go free and go forever. The jury is out whether the measures are effective. But for those critics who say this is totally unnecessary or this is totally unjustified, I'm not sure I agree with that, because things cannot be continuously to be out of control after so many days in Hong Kong, so many interruptions.
Andrea?
I do not agree, because the activists who have been arrested, including the legislators, one of them, Jeremy Tam, he's a pilot with Cathay Pacific, the flagship carrier of Hong Kong. He had to resign his position as a pilot because of the what we call the white terror. People's livelihoods, people have been terminated as a result of their political beliefs and social media posts. These people have not been violent. The alleged crimes they have committed have not been violent crimes. In fact, Hong Kong actually has a law that allows them to detain people or question people for 48 hours without charging them with a crime. So we are not even sure if these legislators have been detained or charged with a crime. Maybe they've just simply been put out of the picture for the next 48 hours. So I don't think this curbs violence at all.
Andrew, one of the difficult things for me watching this story unfold late last night and into the day today is trying to figure out what possible evidence there was there evidence that triggered these arrests? Do you think that the Hong Kong authorities, that the police had evidence, or do you believe these arrests were arbitrary?
I think the evidence could be scant. For example, they're saying that the Joshua Wong and Agnes Chow, they were involved with this illegal occupation or assembly. Well, sure, because they did not get a permit for it, but that's why they got bail so quickly and so easily, albeit with certain conditions. So I really think the police, over the last 11 or 12 weeks, have overextended their power and ability to do whatever is in their power, to whether it is violence or whether in this case it is charges or arrests. I think some of these charges will not stick if in fact they even get charged.
One last question, and Wenrun, let's start with you on this. Do you think we're at a turning point? Do you think that things will be different this weekend?
Well, depending on how the protest and the level of protest turn out, I'm rooting for the whole situation turning into a compromise and dialogue rather than escalation. But at this moment, we do not know. One thing that we can observe and we can see is that Beijing has restrained from using further rhetoric or force potentially. So the idea that somehow we're turning into a Tiananmen kind of a situation, there's no way out, I don't think that's the situation. I think the best way to protest and to reach those goals by the protesters is to use different means of negotiating rather than using more violence. I think that would be a better way to go out.
And Andrea, the threat of violence, the violence itself, do you think that's over now in Hong Kong?
Since Carrie Lam has steadfastly refused to give in for any demands, I thought there was a bit of a softening of her position the week before, but Reuters has reported that China has said, no, do not do that. Carrie Lam, you cannot give in. So I think the violence might continue. It's sad for me to say, because Hong Kong people have not been able to achieve any of the 5 demands, including establishing an independent inquiry into the police brutality. So let's have an independent inquiry into it, but that is overwhelmingly supported by 80% of the people. And yet,
as we've said through the program, it is already Saturday in Hong Kong, so we'll get a clearer sense of how the weekend is shaping up in the next few hours. Andrea and Wenrun, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next on The National, health authorities issue a fresh warning about the dangers of vaping as the number of lung illnesses continue to rise in the U.S. First, though, The National is launching a new season this Monday. We've been hard at work digging into the stories that matter to you and getting some answers. Here's a preview of what you'll see in the weeks to come.
So if you have to be out in 3 days and you don't have a place to go, where will you go?
So you had to get your planes back home and on the ground. And how long did that take?
How did Toronto lose Kauai? How did you lose Kauai?
What's the issue that will really be important to hear more about?
How consistent are umpires?
Why is it so important to the TTC to be so open, even giving us this kind of access?
And I remember getting up off my seat, slamming an emergency, screaming, no!
Death on the tracks. It's a devastating reality, and it's only getting worse. And it's why Toronto's Transit Commission is taking the extraordinary step of talking about it.
Charlottetown's vacancy rate is basically zero, close to the tightest rental market in the entire country. A place where the phrase renoviction is now commonplace.
So what's the plan, Jill?
Beach finds himself not only having to defend the government's approval of the pipeline, but also its decision to purchase it outright. This, in spite of the fact that Beach knows most of his riding is against the project, and he did his best to stop it from happening.
I can tell you what's striking about it is how quickly the computer can make the call. Watch this. Ball. It's actually that fast.
So what role does the umpire still have?
For 3 days, WestJet, like other airlines, continued to carry passengers on their MAX 8s. For the first time, Wilson is speaking publicly about why they kept using the jets.
We look at things from a data perspective. We look at it from our knowledge of the training, our knowledge of what the fault was.
Can you take me to that moment when it worked, when you won?
Africa won, Canada won. Yeah, that was very important. Selfishly, I say that, we prove to people that you don't have to come from a certain place to win.
Thank you very, very much, Chris. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Welcome back. Among the stories we're following tonight, one of the companies in the running to build the next Canadian Forces fighter jet has dropped out of the race. Airbus had been pitching its Eurofighter Typhoon to replace Canada's aging fleet of CF-18s. It cited the high cost of meeting NORAD security requirements for companies outside North America. This leaves Boeing, Saab, and Lockheed Martin competing for the $19 billion contract. The fight to prevent the UK Prime Minister from suspending Parliament during the final push toward Brexit has landed in court.
The judge has declined to grant interim orders, that's like an emergency order, but he hasn't made any ruling on the merits of our argument that the prorogation should be stopped.
The Edinburgh court will hear full arguments on the suspension next week, but it's not the only case. Former UK Prime Minister John Major announced that he's joined another court challenge to halt the suspension, and a third case to keep Parliament open is underway in Belfast. An embarrassing security lapse today for the Twitter co-founder and CEO, Jack Dorsey. His personal account, which has more than 4 million followers, was hacked. Then, over about 15 minutes, it tweeted out a flurry of highly offensive and racist remarks. A group referring to itself as the Chuckling Squad says it did it. Twitter says it is now looking into how this account was taken over.
Going crazy with hunger. Well, eat something. I can't. I gotta lose 10 pounds by 8:30.
Some sad news tonight out of Hollywood. Emmy Award-winning actress Valerie Harper has died after a long battle with cancer. She was best known as TV's Rhoda Morgenstern, the breakout star on The Mary Tyler Moore Show. She was 80 years old. New warnings and new worries tonight about vaping and the effects it could have on your health. More mysterious cases of severe respiratory illnesses are being investigated in the U.S. in people who have used e-cigarettes or other vaping devices. As experts search for a source, they are raising alarm. Alison Northcott brings us one teen story.
In the intensive care unit at a Texas hospital, 17-year-old Tristan Zofeld struggled to breathe while doctors tried to figure out why.
I was throwing up everywhere, my heart was just completely pounding, and I really couldn't breathe.
After numerous tests but no answers, Zofeld's cousin came forward to say the two had been vaping before he got sick.
He immediately went home and grabbed all the vapes and everything, brought it back up to the hospital, showed him, like this is what we've been doing.
The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is looking at more than 200 cases of severe respiratory illnesses in teens and adults who vaped. The CDC says it can't draw a direct link to the practice or specific products, but it is recommending people not buy them off the streets and consider avoiding them altogether. Experts say while vaping is less harmful than smoking, the long-term effects are still unknown. And one expert says these cases point to possible short-term risks too.
That suggests that there must be something wrong with a subset of devices or a contaminant in the liquids that people are vaping, rather than a general impact of health of vaping.
Health Canada says there have been no reported cases here, but it is watching for them. One of the most popular brands of e-cigarettes is Juul Labs, including among teens. The company is under scrutiny in multiple states for its marketing practices, and just this week, a blunt statement to non-smokers from its CEO.
Don't vape, don't use Juul. Don't start using nicotine if you don't have a pre-existing relationship with nicotine.
Any person who does not Juul, who asks oh, can I hit your Juul, or oh, should I Juul, I would definitely tell them no. There's no reason for you to have a relationship like that with nicotine.
Now, after 18 days in hospital, Tristan Zofeld says he was given a second chance and hopes his story can be a warning to others. Alison Northcott, CBC News, Montreal.
Ahead on the National Wire, a couple of New Yorkers are handing out chocolate bars in Newfoundland. Their sweet thank you is tonight's moment. But first, how orchestras around the world and here in Canada are trying to draw a new, younger crowd.
get jiggy with it.
You want to scrap?
My scrap looks more of a vision board.
I'm breaking up with you because you hired a sitcom audience.
I think I'm gonna go to bed. This is too scary.
It's the Fireplace Channel.
And racism. Now, I agree.
Can we do like a four-person thing so we can all equally contribute?
Power to the people. What?
It's coming. CBC, the exclusive home of track and field champions.
A growing number of the world's orchestras are trying something new at the podium. Conductors who aren't quite as old as the great composers. In the struggle to win over younger audiences, orchestras are retooling, and exciting, fresh maestros are part of it. As Deanna Sumanak-Johnson explains, the Toronto Symphony's on board.
From makeup to the photo shoot, marketing a new maestro is a big production. At the Toronto Symphony Orchestra, the new music director is the new big deal. And Spanish conductor Gustavo Jimeno says he's ready.
Yeah, it's part of our lives, sharing passion for what we do. Also, when I will be rehearsing with my colleagues of the TSO, I will be sharing the passion I have for the music.
Jimeno was chosen for the job from dozens of guest conductors.
You see it very clearly on the podium. From the first 30 seconds, there's an electricity in the rehearsal. The musicians kind of sit up a little bit straighter.
But the new music director is coming in at a time when the TSO is $4.5 million in debt. And like the TSO, other institutions have gambled on hiring young, charismatic conductors to attract a new audience. There's the other Gustavo, Dudamel, at the LA Philharmonic, and Canadian Yannick Nézet-Séguin at the Metropolitan Opera in New York. Classical music journalist Michael Vincent says it will be a challenge for the new TSO conductor.
How do you bring music from old dead white guys into the future? And especially in a city like Toronto, where there is a multicultural, diverse population.
Then there's the risk of losing their current patrons while trying to attract younger and more diverse audiences.
Hardcore classical music lovers are there to listen to Beethoven. And in many cases, they present something new. For example, I remember going to a premiere of a Philip Glass piece many years ago at the TSO and watching hundreds of people race from their seats and leave.
But there are reasons to be optimistic. A new international study shows that 31% of music listeners aged 25 to 34 said they listened to classical music. And last year saw a rise in the number of people streaming classical music by almost 50%.
The other part is you can be...
Jimeno believes that if audiences hear it played live, they'll come back for more.
That would be a wonderful thing to achieve, someone feeling something special, which in these modern times with screens and electronics and social media so active, I think this is a great moment to connect with yourself and to experience feelings normally you don't by listening to a classical music concert.
And the TSO is betting that no app can compare to that. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson, CBC News, Toronto.
Just ahead on The National, a couple from upstate New York makes a special delivery to Newfoundland just to say thank you.
One person said they were going to keep it and frame it and hang it on the wall.
Why our moment couldn't get much sweeter. That's next.
Hosting the Great Canadian Baking Show is the best job ever.
Honestly, I just think I want to eat this in private.
Oh, okay. Oh, but you're coming back, no? No.
Presented with Robinhood.
In the wake of 9/11, 38 planes landed in Gander, Newfoundland, and for 5 days, the locals made 6,600 strangers feel at home. And now, even 18 years later, Americans are finding new ways to say thank you to the province. A couple from upstate New York had a sweet idea, and that is our moment.
Well, we met some folks and went to visit them in New Jersey, and they took us to the show Come From Away in New York. And we were so inspired by the story that we decided we wanted to come to Newfoundland and came up with an idea to hand out candy bars with a thank you note on them. We've got one here. And we started to tell our friends about it. And at our cabin party this year, we collected over 600 candy bars. We put wrappers on them and folks signed the candy bars. And we're going to be at Appleton for the 9/11 service that they have every year. They've invited us to stay for their luncheon, and we're going to hand out candy bars there. People get choked up because they've never had somebody do something like this with them before. It's a warm feeling inside to know that we're helping people feel good.
I would appreciate that gesture, and that candy bar would be gone so quickly you would forget that it even existed. But some people, they say, are actually framing the chocolate bars because they're just so moved by it. And I'm going to turn this into like a 10-second promo for Come From Away. If you haven't seen it already, it's the musical based on the story of Gander during 9/11. It is fantastic. It'll make you proud to be a Canadian, and especially if you're a Newfoundlander, even more proud. That is The National for August 30th. Have a great weekend. Good night.